Hello and welcome back to AI Ramblings. Neal Makwana here, and I'm Michael Parekh. Neil, what show number are we at? I always lose count.
20.
All right, 22. I knew that, but it's always fun to read out the numbers, right?
It is.
Anyway, but again, another non-busy week in the world of AI. Of course, you guys are rolling your eyes rightly. Yeah, I'm just an old joke. I got to come up with new ones, new material. But a lot of news nevertheless. And we again had to just, pick a couple of things from the flood rolling by, streaming by. And, number one for me, Neil, AI infrastructure deals. We saw the Oracle OpenAI won $300 billion last week. Now, this week, we have this, gargantuan Nvidia investing $100 billion into OpenAI. And then in exchange, OpenAI will buy 100, not 100 billion, but tens of billions of dollars of Nvidia gear, so there's a little circularity, round robin. I wrote about it a couple of years ago. They're called boomerang deals. We've seen this in every tech wave. In my day when I was running the internet research at Goldman, the star example of this back then was AOL, America Online, which was the premier online internet company, was doing massive numbers of, they didn't have as many zeros as this, but it was still hundreds of millions of dollars of deals, that partnerships with media companies who would then would buy advertising on AOL. And there was a circularity that a lot of stock market investors at the time started to question. Today, we have this flashing green lights phase, something I've written about, where investors are leaning in, they're all in. You saw Oracle was up half in OpenAI a couple of weeks ago when they announced their $300 billion deal with OpenAI, with question marks on how OpenAI would finance it. And so anyway, this spate of infrastructure deals is accelerating. Sam Altman wrote a big essay basically saying he wants to do 1 gigawatt data centers a week, which is a long-term goal. Those are massive numbers, very aspirational. So again, we've written a bunch of long posts on this. There's a lot of detail if you want to go in, but I absolutely think this is a key framework as we go into the fall, because this continues to put the gas on the pedal, the pedal to the metal from an OpenAI point of view against what Meta and Elon's XAI are doing, which are also, to create multiple 1 gigawatt data centers and so on. So the race is definitely on, and the race to finance these things is definitely on. And that brings us to the second news item of this week's discussion, which is Oracle. We talked about them a couple of weeks ago. We just talked about them now. They just reorged their top CEO slot. Their longtime CEO, Safra, is stepping up to the chairman role on the board. Now they will have co-CEOs. Young 39-year-old fellow who's been running the Oracle Cloud is going to ascend to that spot. And his co-CEO is going to be an older gentleman who's been running the traditional Oracle software database business. The young whippersnapper is going to make $250 million. The other one, $100 million, still big numbers. But it shows you the relative positioning and where Oracle is leaning in. This is an almost 50-year-old company that's remaking itself as the number 4, trying to be number 3, number 2 AI cloud company out there from an infrastructure point of view. They're riding very close behind the relationship with OpenAI, with TikTok, which is also going to get hopefully formalized and finalized in terms of the US deal. We'll probably talk about it in show 23 or 4. And then Oracle's also very close to Nvidia, and they're doing things with Apple. So watch that space. Oracle again was up on this news, but it shows that the management restructuring of this is going to be very important, because you do need senior management that can be very fast moving and execution oriented. And so that is a number 2 news item of the week. All of this, by the way, we have notes, details, links in the show notes. So please look for those. And number 3 is obviously, speaking of deals of the week, the Nvidia Intel, investing into Intel, $10 billion. It brings to mind, this notion of incumbents, losing over time. If you go back 5 years, Intel was worth $200 billion, Nvidia was $150 billion. Today, 5 years later, Nvidia is almost $4.4 trillion. Intel is about 115. It popped to 130, 140 billion. shadow itself. Very similar to Apple and Microsoft in '97. I was, at the front table on those things back then. But Microsoft bailed out Apple in '97 when Steve Jobs came back to run Apple, and it was very controversial back then. Reason I bring it out is both of them were influenced by government events. In this case, it's the geopolitical battles between the U.S. and China. Back then, it was antitrust attention on Microsoft, so Microsoft needed to be able to show, hey, we have competition in computers. It's Apple over here. Yeah, we're giving them a few $100 million to, have them not go out of business. And, that's the kind of similar dynamic that Nvidia is doing in the context of Intel. So number of big news items. Those are the three I wanted to highlight. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why it's so fun doing these shows with you, and always, over the years, getting your insight is the parallels to kind of what happened in the last major wave, which was, of course, the dot-com wave in the early 2000s. Just to see, I mean, it's a story I of course, heard about ambiently, being a big fan of Apple, that when Steve Jobs came back, Microsoft had to build them out. And then, of course, there's been the long Apple versus Microsoft debate for, in terms of products and whatnot. But to see it's strategically done once again from an Nvidia point of view for Intel. I mean, Intel ever since even Apple made the shift a couple of years ago to their own chipset has been struggling. So to see Nvidia come in and bail them out, just from antitrust point of view is fascinating. But more or less, it just highlights the thing that you've been driving home on the Substack for over a year, over a couple of years now. Is just how many parallels there are. Of course, there's always new things. This whole reorg of every company, the shifting up and down the hierarchy of leaders in each company is something that's a little bit unique this time, I would say. There's so many parallels and so many lessons to be learned from this.
No, it's exciting time, and the key piece is that this is all early, and number one, number two, right now it has got a very strong tailwind with investors approving all this. And the other thing I'll just highlight is all these are driven by very secular, strong viewpoints by the founders, by the CEOs, that we need to invest even these crazy numbers, because if we don't, the risk of not having participated is bigger than participating. Mark Zuckerberg was on a podcast. We put a link in one of the things that we wrote up, where he was asked, you guys are spending $600 billion collectively over the next 3 or 4 years, you're going to waste some. And he said, yeah, because the interviewer said 200 billion. He said, yeah, if we lose 200 billion, that's a big, scary number. It's terrible. I'm paraphrasing here. But he said, if we don't, we're going to be further behind. And that is there's the fear of missing out. Investors are buying into it. In my lifetime of having done this for 30 plus years, I've been through 5, maybe 6, depending on how you count them, big market dislocations where you wake up one morning and everything's down 20, 30%, et cetera. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens, and they're called black swans. And we're going to see probably 1, maybe 2 of those in this AI tech wave that we write and talk about, et cetera. That's a relatively high degree of certainty. What's not high degree of certainty is when. And that's the, at this point, $1 trillion question, $64 trillion question, maybe. And that is the issue. And speaking of these aggressive investments, it takes us to our major topic of the week, which is the chase for alternative form factors for distributing AI beyond smartphones. So, excuse me, my phone is ringing, and luckily the AI is telling me it's potential spam. It's saying potential spam, so AI, machine learning. But my point is, everyone is chasing the next distribution vehicle, and smartphones today are bigger than AI, $400+ billion a year. And the one company that feels left out on this is Meta, Mark Zuckerberg. He is very aggressively, and he said so, looking for the next device that supplants smartphones. And he has gone all in, as it were, on, as we've talked about before, on smart glasses. Put these things out. He's been working on these smart glasses, his company, 10 years, spent tens of billions of dollars. These are the first ones that came out 3-4 years ago. They take pictures. You can talk to it and say, Meta AI, and ask questions. And that's about it. And now they have partnerships with Ray-Ban and Oakley, and they've got new versions that they announced. So they had Meta Connect, and it was a big event. They announced 4 different types of glasses. There were 2 or 3 of these models as of Vanguard with Oakley, which are very cool extreme sports thing. I ordered them, of course, and I'm far removed from extreme sports, but they look cool. And, maybe I can pretend, and you can judge me at that point. But the fourth one is that they announced which will be out and available on the third. So a few days. I'm going to put an order in, and there's a display. It's the it's the Meta Smart Glass display. Great catchy name. There's a display in the right screen that allows you to see messages and pictures and videos right there. And that is cool. It is a step forward on this. And they're working on their big AR glasses Orion project, which, they demoed that months ago. We wrote about it. That is the cash meow. Everyone wants that. They look like glasses. They do holographic imaging. They've got lots of stuff. That and the display one that's coming out end of this month as a wrist strap that reads muscles and how they talk to the brain. So you're going to be able to do a lot of pinchy pinch things and control things. And that strap is going to have a lot of applications for things beyond glasses. You'll be able to control theoretically computers and phones and so on. But for that, Meta will have to have a game plan to make that a platform and open it up to third parties, which they've not committed to doing. So I talk about all of this because there's a lot of energy, huge amounts of money. If AI wasn't going on in the hundreds of billions, we would all be talking about this because the numbers involved are tens of billions. And it's not just Meta, right? Google is literally probably weeks behind of announcing their smart glasses. They've hinted that very strongly at the Pixel events, etc. Amazon just said, is now linked to doing their own smart glasses. And Apple, we know they have the Vision Pros, which, you've seen me talk about and put them on, and they're right over there, and I like them a lot. But they also need to. So we're going to have 4 or 5. And then, of course, don't forget Snapchat. You're one of your favorite companies, a bunch of others, and a bunch in Asia. So smart glasses, they're vying to be the next multi-$100 billion platform. There are lots of issues with it, but I will pause here. And first of all, tell me how I look with these glasses, because that's one of the core things about these things. Unlike smartphones, we always worry about,
Yeah.
how do I look?
No, I
How do I
mean,
look?
I think in terms of form factor, these are a bit older. You can tell that these are smart glasses. And that's the discussion we had a bit earlier before we started taping, is one benefit with some of the new ones that have come out, especially the bigger Oakley, extreme sport ones, is the cameras in the middle. I think it's very easy to know if these are smart glasses or not, because there's these very clear circular cutouts in the frames that will indicate to anyone. And of course, there's also lights for various social engineering reasons. Yeah, I think from a form factor, they look great. And in terms of form factor and engineering, there's a great video I saw on TikTok, but we have it in the show notes. It's this PhD student talking about the tech that's gone into these new smart glasses that Meta's going to be releasing with the display. And of course, this is not the thing that everyone will have on their mind, but it's the type of stuff that I love to focus on just because of the sheer amount of product design and engineering that goes into it. And he essentially explains that they had to etch these very fine and precise channels into the glass to be able to map each individual pixel onto the display, which is a little bit different than, of course, what Apple's done with their Vision Pro goggles and what Google did years ago with Glass, where you would just actually put a physical micro display in front of the eye. This is very different from that. In terms of the actual tech and what was demoed, of course, there was this is the unfortunate thing with all this, is that whenever there's a demo, in Meta's case, of course, a lot of things went wrong, and that's kind of what took all the headlines. As the internet went out and they weren't able to properly demo these things, and of course that'll always happen during these things. But whenever the reviewers did get it into their hands, I saw a pretty overwhelming amount of positive reaction to this. Stuff like overlaying maps and music and whatnot, that's been done. I don't think we're really pushing the boundaries at all with that. But I think areas where this is really useful, we talked about it this weekend in person. Stuff like the subtitles, the real life subtitles. Whenever you're speaking to someone, everyone jumps to think of things like translation. Of course, with the new AirPods from Apple doing live translation finally, but even being able to just get visual cues and subtitles as to who you're talking to, and what they're saying in real time. A lot of people are hard of hearing. The world's getting increasingly louder with ambient noise, everyone being on their phones and whatnot. Just being able to actually hear what people are saying and see what they're saying, I think is a great feature that they've added in that maybe hasn't been talked about as much. I think the tech behind it, this whole wristband that they've added, is great. It's akin to what Apple did a bit with the hand gestures. Of course, Apple didn't have an actual band that would go on the wrist, but they would just track it all with a variety of sensors and cameras, which is also why
Cameras.
the visual the Vision Pro is so expensive. One thing I did want to highlight, it's a company, that a lot of people forgot about. It came and went, it feels like, in this like blistering pace of news, but it's Humane AI a few years ago with their AI pin that they released. There were
Ex-Apple guys,
several
all ex-Apple guys on
all
Gals.
example, some really cool engineering and tech behind it. But ultimately, one of the reasons it failed is because of the way that they built out the platform. And you mentioned the platform a little while ago, and that's one thing I wanted to spend some time on is because Humane was very, very closed off in the way they will let you access this. There wasn't really like a phone app. You'd have to go on a desktop computer. There wasn't as much support for third-party apps and whatnot. And that's something that Meta and a lot of these companies are going to have to figure out because, as far as I can tell, the only partnership that Meta's done in terms of these glasses is with Spotify for music. Everything else is their own proprietary tech and proprietary apps, and everything's closed off. And I think really the value of this comes with, as we saw with the iPhone, a couple, more than a decade ago, a few decades ago now at this point is I feel like that really exploded when the App Store became a thing, which of course infamously what wasn't a feature until the second or third generation. I think once they really opened this up to developers and let people use it in ways that maybe wasn't originally intended by Meta is where the real value will be unlocked. But just from a social engineering point of view, the amount of content I see now on TikTok and Instagram that has been recorded by these glasses is a lot more than I honestly would have expected. I remember I think 2016, 17 through you, I got access to the Snapchat glasses. And I took them when I was on a trip to DC in high school, and everyone was fascinated by them, and I was able to record all these really cool videos, hands free, of the monuments and whatnot. And it felt like a kind of a glimpse into the future, what the future could be, and to see Meta realizing that a bit fuller and actually it being appealing to everyday people to record content is I think great, and it's just something that's evolving, and every time we talk about it, I feel like there's something new. So it's great to see.
No, great points. I want to come back on a couple of them. Number one, the developer support. Developer support, and you're a software engineer, master's grad, you know this. Software is hard. Developer support can only happen once you've gotten the platform in a stable, mature state, hardware, software, number one. Number two, have units out there that developers are attracted to. So you talked about Humane. Humane was no position. I mean, no startup. There's Rabbit, which is another one. You're a dinky little startup and you're going to tell developers, oh, come and build for my, oh, yeah, right. How many products have you sold? It costs, engineering resources as any other company. They're not going to spend it.
Yeah.
Even Apple, the iPhone that came out in 2007, they didn't have an app store for 2 or 3 years later. They needed to get millions and billions of these things out. These smart glasses today, relative success for Meta. Guess how many units have been sold? They have not officially talked about it, but there are numbers that are reasonable approximations. 2 million, 1 to 2 million max. Okay, that's not enough for developers to build anything for this thing. We need zeros, tens, and hundreds, which is why Johnny Ive, OpenAI, they just sold Johnny Ive sold his company. We talked about it in one of our earlier shows. They're shooting for 100 million minimum to launch starting next year, end of next year. So that's a 28, 29 story. OpenAI, speaking of news, was in the news. They're poaching manufacturing supply chain engineers and hardware, software from Apple. This is a multi-year race. You're absolutely right. The platform is a key piece. Zuckerberg knows this, but he needs to do this. But Zuckerberg, by the way, has a bad record on developers. I will tell you in a different time. 2008, I was at the first Facebook. This was when it wasn't Meta, it was Facebook. Had a big their first developer conference. I was there, and they had, by that time they had half a billion people on Facebook. So developers were excited. That's a market. We can build apps. And one of my friends, Mark Pincus, had this great idea to create a little company called Zynga. He was good friends with all the top VCs and Mark and everybody. And he got, pole position, and he built this company called Zynga. And one of the most successful games on Facebook for the next couple of years was Farmville, which, hundreds of millions of people played. And it made Zynga and Mark Pincus, very successful. And what I'm saying is 3 years later, Meta said, Facebook said, we don't want to do all that because we don't want you guys to get rich off us. They took a lot of it back. And so Zynga and everybody had to get off Facebook. But the point on this, platform businesses are hard. both for to attract developers in, and then even when you get lots of successful developers, there are big business decisions on whether do I keep the goodies for myself or do I really allow it to be a platform? It's a very, very tough thing to do, and you have to. And we're going to see a lot of that in the AI world. We're just in the beginning stages of all this, and these things are complicated on that basis. The last thing I'll say on smart glasses, since it is our main topic, in talking units, Zuckerberg on his podcast talked about his aspirations are maybe these. He basically says there are 1 or 2 billion people on the planet that wear some type of glasses, and he thinks over the next 5-7 years these things will basically replace majority of them. I think he's aggressive and aspirational. I think it's much longer. Glasses are far more complicated than smartphones. The smartphones, all we had to do was replace our Blackberries for the metal keys for the screen. That was easier. These, they have to look good. They have to feel good. Over half the people, over half the people who wear glasses, they need, distance and vision correction. That adds a lot of cost, especially if these things have screens and holographic doodads built in them. Now I got to build in prescription on top of that. Huge friction points. Mark knows all this, but he has to talk a very strong bullish game, so he does it. Same thing that Elon did 15 years ago. We're going to have self-driving cars in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Guess what? We're level 2 today out of level 5 today in 2025. Self-driving long time away. What's he doing? What Elon doing now? We're going to have humanoid Optimus robots. We'll sell millions of them in the next 2 or 3 years. Guess what? 10 years, 15 years. Why? The training for that stuff, the data doesn't exist. I'm talking about these upsides and downsides because those are the realities of these things. You and I, we sit here, we talk about these things, and most of the media talks about these products and services like they're right around the corner. And I absolutely want to put some cold water over there because you and I, you more than me, are a technologist. You are an engineer. You have to build the stuff. I am an investor in engineers, and I have to assess that. And so you have to match the financial and the secular technology realities. And at the same time, the gizmos are exciting. Last thing I'll say on the glasses. We've talked about them. They are creepy. The societal norms have not been solved. Okay. If I'm sitting here and if I regular glasses, you're fine to talk to me. You see this cameras, doodads, it looks thicker. Is he recording me? Is he looking with the display thing? Most of the reviewers, you were right, were ecstatic about the quality that the people outside couldn't see there was a display. Technology is fabulous, fabulous. But already they were saying, "Oh, but I can see you're not paying attention to me. You're distracted." Societal cues, creepiness. The one killer app, and we've talked about it, the killer app for these things for me or in the world, I think, is basically this stuff, basically recognizing everyone in a room that I walk into at a cocktail party and telling me this is so-and-so, that is so-and-so. It's what Apple showed in a Siri commercial a little bit. It's what, we've seen in Mission Impossible glasses and so on, but it's creepy as hell. And half the world, there are laws that, prevent that. In half the states in this country, I can't record stuff without other people's permission. The other day yesterday I had to fix my broadband connection here. Anyone who comes on, this call is being recorded. They have to say that as a legal thing. Laws are far slower to change than technology. So all of this is major headwinds for the functionality that the Metas and the Apples and the Googles want. But they're big mega companies, so they can afford to invest for the true long term while telling their investors it is a little less long term than it is. And these are the pros and cons that I wanted to discuss in a little bit more detail. And you made some great points, and I think this is how it feels weighing out. And
Yeah,
we're going to have a lot of fun talking about it. But more importantly, you will have a lot of opportunity to figure out how you want to play in all this as a bottom up engineer, my friend.
exactly. Exciting times.
So that takes us to the end of our major topic. So that also takes us to our read of the week. And there, I think you have a cool read of the week, Neil, also talking
Yeah.
about new cool technologies
Yeah,
around the
new cool
corner here.
technologies and new places that I'm hopefully going to find myself in soon. It was an article from the New York Times talking about. I guess I can mention the title of the article first. It's titled "Peak SF on a Friday Night is a Robot Fight," and it's a really interesting article. A little out of left field from what we usually talk about, but it has to do with the AI boom that's happening in the Bay Area, of course, and how it's kind of burgeoning this unique wave of tech-centric live events, which in this case is a robot boxing matches and these underground rings on Friday nights. One of my favorite movies is Fight Club by David Fincher, which is of course an underground fighting ring called Fight Club, and there's a variety of nuances with that name. But this is something that kind of is more in the vein of something like a Real Steel, where there's people controlling these robots that are fighting for prizes, and in the end of the day, it's a social event, it's a gathering thing. One of the reasons I'm trying to get out to the Bay as soon as possible is from the networking piece, and this is something that's a little bit maybe more entertaining and fun than just like a cocktail party at a bar. This is a lot more engaging, and they're fully leaned into it. They've named these robots very specific things to draw light to people in tech and whatnot, and these things come at no cheap cost. I mean, they're reporting that one of these robots costs like $60,000. Spectators paying around like $100 per ticket. So it's something that's blown up recently and ties into something we discussed a bit earlier, where it's kind of something I'd want to get your input on to see if this is anything that you remember. But the article mentions that these events are kind of akin to something that was happening in past tech booms, where in the dot-com era, according to this article, there were similar robot fights, but obviously a lot more primitive technology. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of draw light to it, but also kind of get your input on if this is anything that you remember from years ago.
Oh, totally. I mean, I was a sucker. It was a big, that's what I was looking up. I was paying attention. There were several major TV shows where
Yeah.
teams of kids from various groups at universities, they would assemble these robots and they would put as much destructive saws and hammers and whatever on it. It's a super fun show. You can get them, you can watch it
Yeah.
today. And it was very popular. Here, Britain had a few. Europe, that I know in Asia, yeah, it's a thing for 20 years. But here, we're now taking the latest and greatest AI stuff, and
Yeah.
then another iteration. So history rhymes, it echoes. Look, we've loved item A versus item B, human A versus human B since the gladiators and before. So
Yeah.
this is nothing new. Thousands of years, we used to actually put real people, watch Russell Crowe,
Yeah. Yeah.
fight off things with
Yeah.
swords and this is the other version of it. So I love it. And,
Yeah.
of course people are, gonna, and sadly, we still do this even in the context of absence of technologies in terms of illegal fights with animals and all of that stuff all over the world. And people bet on it and so on. And, it's fundamentally, appealing to humans. And so and so this is absolutely an iteration of that. So it's way beyond my time and your time.
Yeah.
And yeah, but the robot battle shows we'll put up in the show notes. They were around. You can watch them. They're fun.
Wonderful.
And those are cool engineering because those were engineers building those things. And also what I thought was fun watching those things is how they repaired them. They would have intermissions because the things would get shredded. Things would fly off. They would have to fix it in a few minutes and go back in and finish the fight. A lot of fun. There were a couple of movies along this as well. And that were also very good. Anyway, but so great read of the week. My read of the week. Look, I was around in the day of the early web, internet analyst at Goldman, but the internet wouldn't have happened without several key people. One of them, dude by the name of Tim Berners-Lee, who most people today don't remember, but he literally invented the World Wide Web, the underlying protocols, HTTP, etc. And he did it when he was a scientist at CERN, which is the Big Hadron Collider, which is my other major life obsession. And he did it in the 90s, and he did something extraordinary with it, which is that he made it all open source and gave it to the world, and people could build on it. And all of a sudden, it allowed another person who I also knew, who was a student in Illinois, who also had access to super fast computers, just like Tim did in the 90s. He had super connected computers, which is why he could build this prototype World Wide Web. But this other dude created what was called the browser. And his one was better, Mosaic, and then it became Netscape. And that's Mark Andreessen, who now runs a $50-60 billion venture fund. And what I'm trying to say is that Tim Berners-Lee is a very key person in this whole thing. He wrote a new book that we'll have in the show notes. I'm halfway through it. Amazing. Please read it if you want. It's called This Is For Everyone, The Unfinished Story of the World Wide Web. A great book. We'll have some links in the show notes. Washington Post did a good review of it. I wrote a post on it. And the reason is not because we go down memory lane. The reason is the internet is what is going to be built. We're going to see AI building on. The internet was built for humans, human to human, H to H. And what we're talking about now is AI and AI machine stuff being built for humans, more content, AI slop, etc. But now also machine to machine, agents and so on talking. So all of this is going to be built on top of all of this stuff. And so now that we've got 25 years of experience on the good things and the bad things, Tim in the book talks about how can we try and address some of the bad things that we saw in the last 25 years for the next 25 years and see if we can get ahead of it and fix it. Easier said than done, but it's important to think about it for everyone involved: users, analysts, investors, builders, engineers, etc. So great book. It'll make you think a little bit longer perspective. I would make it one of my readers of the week, which
Great.
takes us to our obsessions of the week, Neil. And I think you might have touched on
Yeah.
yours a little bit, but please go ahead.
Yeah. Mine is it's an article from The Verge, but it has to do with a new release from Google, their AI mood board, as they're calling it. It's this whole idea of mood boards is something I've been fascinated by for a long while now. Whether it's things like Pinterest, where essentially you can organize a collection of thoughts onto a board, whether you're trying to curate something in fashion or in design. Where Pinterest was a lot more of a social platform, Google's is much more just a private board for you to use and potentially share with people. But most importantly, it leverages a lot of the AI tools that they've been building, where you can generate images based on the content of the board and whatnot. It's similar to what Apple did with Freeform, which is a very underrated piece of Apple software, in my opinion, for the last few years. I use it
I
actually
love
a
it.
decent amount to just collect thoughts. It's a lot more robust than Notes, where it's just text and images, but you can actually drag things around like you have a physical whiteboard in front of you. Figma, another company that, of course, recently IPO'd and that I've used for a while, had a similar thing called FigJam, where it's another board where you can put sticky notes and whatnot. It's nothing new, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's good to see Google embrace this and add a lot of their compute and AI features into this platform. So it's something that I found out about, and I'm gonna have to use a lot more and get back in a future episode. But it was cool, so thought I'd talk about it.
Awesome. I love mood boards. You and I have talked. It's an area that I've been fascinated by. Pinterest is obviously the ultimate social mood board. I've had some entrepreneurial ventures in that realm as well that you've been involved with, an area
Yeah,
close to our hearts. And so topic to be continued, but very cool that Google's doing this. My obsession of the week is the continuation of the Apple launch of all the iPhones, the 4 iPhones and so on. And of course, because I have a very understanding wife, I can buy more than one or two iPhones. And so I got my hands this week on the orange iPhone Pro Max 17 and the iPhone Air. And if you go on YouTube, most of the debates on Air is wonderful, but it only has one camera. Its battery's small because it's super thin. It's only got one speaker. The process, it doesn't have liquid cooling. So because it's thin like this one. So, all these negatives. And I just wanted both of them just to see what it's like to use them. I just got them in a couple of days ago and I love them both. Okay? And to me, unfortunately, you got to be in a position to be able to have both because most people have it's either one or the other. And if it's one or the other, and if you're in the price range of the $1,000 of this, I would say go get the iPhone 17, the base model. You'll get more camera, more everything than this, a little thicker. But when you put the battery pack on this, it's the same thickness. Go get the 17 or the 17 Pro Max. My quick review on this thing. But if you want, to me, this is a two-door sports car. And this is a sedan or a pickup truck. That's it. And, the average American household has more than one car, and we afford two cars. We can afford two phones if we want to. And don't connect one to a phone line and, save another $1,000 to one of the carriers and use Wi-Fi. But I'm telling you, the light one it's a sports car. It feels every time I lift it up, it brings a smile to my face. It's been a few days and I know from experience that this is not a transitory novelty honeymoon period kind of thing. Why? Because I have also loved for a long time the iPhone 13 mini. This is the Apple stopped making these things. This is the Air. See the size? And I love this thing for a long time. I still use it as a phone when I'm a night on the town. I don't want a bulky thing, etc. And Apple doesn't make them anymore. But awesome little device. Again, multiple cars. People have cars in various sizes. They have bags in various sizes. They have purses in various sizes. we programmed ourselves that it's only one, and it's not one. It's multiple. There are multiple tools. So just get off. All the reviewers, MKB, everything, just enough. Most of your audience, if they're watching your videos, they can afford more than one. They'll figure it out. Just explain the pros and cons. But it's a sports car versus a pickup truck, and that's my obsession. And I love the software, the hardware, the feel. I'll have more to say on it. But obsession is basically what are you spending inordinate amount of your hours that are not devoted to working. Unfortunately, this stuff is it this
Yeah.
week for me.
Great.
Okay, so we're going to round out the show. Burning questions time. Neil, what's your burning question?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
let me
I
ask you a
guess
burning question first.
okay.
Okay, go ahead. You don't know
You go.
I think you might have asked me already. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's you kind of teed it up, but I guess I'll elaborate a bit more on it. Is are there things, and I know it's still early days and whatnot, but are there use cases where you see yourself wanting to pick up the air or you go to the air? I mean, all these things come down to habits. I know both phones in the end do the same things, have the same apps, but are there certain apps or certain use cases or scenarios where you might pick up an Air versus the Pro? Yeah, kind of. Are there any nuances in the way you're using them?
The nuance is, yes, there's endless apps, right? And things change, and and we use it to consume stuff. By the way, this is all my phones, Android or whatever, have the MagSafe. This is the pop socket. I love these things. This is the single best piece of unheralded technology, you know, out there. You can get MagSafe versions, non-MagSafe versions. Love it. So to answer your question, though, we talked about it last week. We spend more time with our phones now than we do in our beds. Okay, so the real answer from my point of view is when I'm just doing anything and everything, and if I'm out and about or sitting, this thing, this is 165 or so grams. This is about 230 grams, not that much, 50, 60 grams. You can worry about. What I'm saying is it adds up when you're spending several hours reading, writing, emailing, texting, doom scrolling, whatever, and cumulatively you feel it. So the killer app from me on these things is is as simple as the weight and the form factor, single-handed. The other thing is everyone says, oh, Apple did this because it's a precursor to they're taking two very thin phones and making their version of a fold, which Samsung's now on version 7, Google's on version 4. I have most of them over there. I have the folds and so on, and I play with them. Here's the problem to your question on what do I use this for? I have the fold. I almost never use them. Almost never use them. Why? Very subtle thing. Because you're a product guy. Very subtle thing. These things I can use with one hand, finger, do all this. The moment I open a fold, you have to open it. Now it's two-handed. I might as well pick up any one of my iPads. Or if I don't have it, it's wonderful. But that use case Venn diagram is small. So it's really the sum of sometimes it's the simplest things. The weight cumulatively, is just to feel, which is why, by the way, I still use this thing. It feels like nothing. It's like I'm just looking at the world through something that's barely in my hand. That's the killer app. The apps, everything, that's wonderful, but it's not the apps. It's just how it interacts with your body and your mind. That longitudinal use case is the key killer app. And that's why I think the folds are, even the trifold is a cool gee whiz. Isn't it great? We can do this with technology type of product. And nerd heads like me with more money than sense will buy these stupid things. But these are not yet mainstream products. Including the Flip. The Flip is nice, which is just a flippy thing. But then the screen's too small. I mean, the last thing I'll say on the fold is that if you look at all the reviews of the various folds, now there've been almost a dozen cumulatively. Almost every reviewer basically, they most of the time they're using the front screen because there are two screens inside and one on the outside. And tests are showing people are spending 70-80% of the time with the front screen. But why? Because they're used to using the fold with the one as a one hand, not in the two hand. And they're already saying only less than 20% of the time people actually open the dang thing and use it. But that's what Apple theoretically is doing. They're pretty much affirmed to be creating a fold next year. And we'll see how it does. Recognize, they're not calling this the iPhone 17 Air. They're calling it the iPhone Air because I think they're signaling it's a transitional product. Just like the Mini was. But it's look, we got in the series, we got
Like trading
my pickup truck. The Air in this scenario is my sedan, and this is my two-door. But if I don't use the Air anymore, then this is my two-door. This is my Porsche 911, which was one of my favorite sports cars of all time. I bought one when I was not much older than you, and again, more money than sense. But I love that thing. I love that
Yeah,
thing every time. It wasn't a few days, few weeks. Had it for over 30 years. Awesome. So anyway, so
wonderful.
that's my answer to your burning question. My burning question to you, because you and I were at the Apple Store post the launch,
Yes,
to
yes.
get this and that and the other, and you love this stuff as much as I do, and you've got your phone coming, your 17 Pro Max. Any impressions on the Apple Store? Because you have a
Yeah.
cool way of looking at the world, and I want to get
Yeah,
that
it was
sense.
fun. It had not only been a while since I'd been in an Apple store, but I can't really remember the last time I was in there close to a launch. I think we went 2 or 3 days after the phone had launched in stores, and it was busy. We went to one of the more popular ones in Houston, and it was full. There was a bit of a line actually forming, even though it was raining outside. People still showed up, and it was busy. It was funny. I hadn't been in the store in a while, and it's great to see the phones in hand. We'd gone to a T-Mobile store to do a similar kind of like iPhone reorganizing every few years as I do with my parents. And T-Mobile does a really bad job of displaying the phones. They're fully bolted down for security issues. You can't pick them up. Now, when it comes to things like the Air, of course, Apple allowing you to actually pull these devices into your hands, just a little tiny string attaching them, and actually feel them as they're intended to be felt was great. And yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of fun. Always love a trip to the Apple stores.
No, I think that's is so right on in terms of I mean, now everyone in the world copies the Apple Store, and so when you go into T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, Microsoft, Google, they have their own versions of these stores, and they look, with the little brown tables and so on. But you know what? Apple is doing the store at Apple thing. The reason the phone was as bolted down on T-Mobile is because T-Mobile doesn't have the technology to secure that stuff. There are lots of YouTube videos where people come in and basically into an Apple store and just grab all the phones and steal it, and the alarms go off, and they put in a bag and run. But you may not know this, but those phones, everything in that store, especially engineered with software that
Yeah,
basically bricks it instantly.
yeah.
Once it's out of the Wi-Fi, the Apple Store
Perimeter,
Wi-Fi,
yeah.
it's dead. It's dead, and it's got tracking, so the cops can, if the Apple chooses it, they can get your ass. And so it is. They built the technology in the demos that you think
Yes.
are, unshackled, and that's
Yeah.
serious hardware engineering, software engineering, ergonomic engineering, all to allow people the freedom to wear the watches, the phones, and have this extraordinary experience. That is, even though there are skin surface copycats, you cannot emulate it in any other store that tries to be an Apple store. So I just wanted to, again, another ode to one of our favorite companies. Hats off. It always starts and ends with the technology and the experience, the design, as Apple said with the Steve Jobs quotes in the last presentation for the 17 launch. And Apple is Apple. And
Yeah.
so with that, I think we can, maybe those last words we could say, thank you again for joining us today. Please, as usual, we appreciate it. All likes, subscribes, comments, feedback, always welcome. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on episode 23. And as always, stay tuned.
See you next week. Bye.